It's funny because most podcasts I do, it's quite cookie cutter, but I'm sitting here thinking a lot, and things keep popping up in my head, you know, just about why I am the way I am.
Josh White.
He's the co-founder of Cano Water.
I did a lot of what my dad has done. And I've seen traits of both my parents in me. You know, that's why roots is so important, because you can take bad traits and you have to really learn from that. A lot of these people were very different to me. There was definitely a bit more of a, you know, an arrogance. Money's everything, everything. I'm also someone that's gone through a lot of trauma, but I'm very fortunate to have seen my dad go through that and cope. And I've learned that. I wouldn't have been a DJ, because that would have been embarrassing, but I've always just done what I want to do. You know, I've lost friends to suicide. You know, I've been around people that were so ashamed to just tell people who and what they are. What was massive for me was going into rehab. You know, I've got a saying, strangers saved my life. You know, you walk into a meeting, people would hug you, they would take your number, they would reach out to you. What I've been very fortunate with is meeting these people.
If someone in your family 2 generations from now were to have the chance to listen to this, what's the one thing that you'd want them to understand about you? First, cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers to a Cano. Yeah, from the gym to the podcast room.
Yeah.
And our story's been quite an adventure, because we've had 2 cancelled or 2 postponed.
We have. One your fault, one my fault.
Yeah. And that's how the world works. But
100%.
it's nice to go into this knowing you're on a personal level. Your brand is everywhere, sold 85 million roughly, and still going to grow.
Yeah.
I think earlier this year it was 70 and now it's 85. So
yeah, it's been a busy year.
Yeah. And if people don't know the brand, which I'm sure most people have seen it in different shops, but maybe don't know the person behind it, what makes this conversation really wildly different for me is that I like to try and dig a bit deeper rather than just, who is the name and where are you from? It's more, let's go back a bit deeper with where you're from to some of your roots. And why this is also a different conversation is that we're going to be touching on not just these cultural roots that, you know, I think are really fascinating, and some of the people who've listened to previous episodes will know there are influences that our parents and grandparents and the way that they were raised and the way they taught us to be raised have had influence, but also what I'm calling your like neurological roots, because the ADHD has played a big role that you've been openly talking about with the thing that you've done. Starting with those cultural roots, you know, going back to before Cano Water, what for you was that initial Josh and his perspective on what success was? What did it look like for you growing up as what you were searching for as a kid?
Honestly, like, it wasn't anything to do with money. Like, it was, success for me was basically just to be happy. Because as a kid, I was very lost, very lost. I genuinely didn't see really past 18, to be honest with you. So for me, it was kind of, how do I find myself? Because I was very, very lost, and I looked around at everyone else, and I thought that everyone had found themselves. I was very wrong. It was everything was a mind thing. You know, it wasn't real. It was just a facade that my mind was making up. But you know, the answer to your question is success was just, how do I get through another day? Genuinely, because I was that low and that sort of lost, and my whole life was kind of as far as I can remember, was I was just a very troubled little boy, you know.
this is something that you've been really open to talk about. And I think it's a lot of these studies show that some of the most successful people now have had something, I think it's 60-70% have had something in their childhood which is considered a real sense of struggle. And obviously that struggle can be seen as very subjective, but something along the lines of a disjointed or dysfunctional family background, or really feeling the pressure of feeling insecure or inferior. Some of the top sports stars, right? They were always trying to impress their father or something, and that really drove them. But where I think that the cultural roots angle becomes really fascinating is how, coming from a background where hard work is not just drilled into you, but is kind of seen all around you because of I don't want to say struggles again, but the situation and circumstances that our own previous family went through, right? So again, people who listened to this before will know that I've spoken a lot about how I found out that what my grandparents did in leaving India to go to Africa was already a thing that maybe 2% of people from our background did.
Yeah.
And then they had to work really hard in Africa to rebuild themselves. And then my parents' generation, they got kicked out of Africa and they had to rebuild again. So that's 2 generations of a lot of risk taking, a lot of not knowing what's on the other side of the hill, a lot of basically what we call entrepreneurship nowadays.
Yeah.
That if I didn't firstly have that in my heritage, I wouldn't have what I have now.
For sure.
But then also seeing my own dads and uncles where they had to set up a business because they were kicked out. They came
had no
here.
choice. Yeah.
Looking at your background in that sense, do you see any of those patterns that emerged either in your grandparents' generation or parents' generation, where it's not just that hard work that was instilled, but also just you saw risk taking and a mindset of like, knuckle down and work?
For sure.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I would say, we spoke about this before, like my dad has always been extremely hardworking.
Yeah.
He came from absolutely nothing. My mum was adopted. So, I think for many, many years, I didn't really know where a lot of my traits came from, to be honest with you. I have a lot of addiction in my family and a lot of ADHD. I think, for me, not knowing what my mum's roots were, which, funny enough, I actually found them recently, which is really, really interesting. I went on a whole journey to find them. And that was really interesting because entrepreneurialism was huge with her real dad, who she never knew, who sadly passed away. But that was just very interesting. I never really cared about my roots, to be honest with you. It was never a thing that I cared about until recently when I had my own kid, and then it became very important to me. So I sort of went on that journey. But, my dad's mum sort of, was, she was in hiding in the war, she was in Belgium, came here. I don't know too much about it, but, had 3 kids and not a lot of money. My grandpa, who was, funny enough, he was one of the world's strongest men.
Wow.
Funny enough, yeah. He had diabetes. He went blind very early on and died when my dad was a kid, very young, at like 12, 13 years old. And, they didn't have anything. And my dad kind of did everything in his power to be successful. And that is, I've watched my whole life my dad hustle and work hard. I think something to note about my dad is that, like, he's always been very, I wouldn't say that he's ever been like a CEO or like a, he owned, he's owned his own businesses, but he's always got his hands dirty.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
It's always been him that's done it. And I'm very like that. And someone always says, and I credit him, Simon Squibb, who's a friend of mine, he always says, like, kids do what they don't do what you say, they do what you do.
Yeah.
And honestly, like, there's never been a truer statement, because I never listened to a word that my parents said ever. And I think that's really important to talk about. But I did a lot of what my dad has done. And I've seen traits of both my parents in me, albeit good traits and bad traits. And that's why roots is so important, because you can take bad traits and you have to really learn from that. And I've seen, in myself and also in other aspects of my life, like, where it can actually go the complete opposite way. Like, you're talking about how, the positives of it, they went through negatives and then positives. I've seen it from the opposite as well, which can be quite dark, in the addiction world and the ADHD world, where you can turn it into a positive. But essentially, my dad's my hero, really, because it's similar to you. Without him, without seeing that graft, I definitely wouldn't be where I am now. Because, the truth is that there isn't a lot of entrepreneurialism in my family. Yeah. There's none. I would say that I'm the only entrepreneur who's kind of gone and taken a big risk. Yeah. And that's, I call myself the accidental entrepreneur. I've said it on every podcast, because, you are right. There's no point in talking about the story of Cano Water without hearing the people and the stories behind it, because, like, we actually, we shouldn't be here. And actually, well, I definitely shouldn't be here. I shouldn't have this. I shouldn't even really, I count myself very lucky. Yeah. And a lot of that is through learning, and roots have actually been, my roots have been it's been a massive learning for me, because there with the ADHD and addiction, there is I could have gone down a different path, a completely different path. That sadly, a cousin of mine who passed away because of drugs, she did go down that path. And I've got family members at the moment right now that are going down that path. Really, yeah. So it's important to learn your roots and understand maybe what are the positives and what are the negatives, and how can you be the best version of yourself to come out the other end.
One of the points that you're making about the good and the bad that you can take, and you're right, there is both. And what we're really fortunate on being part of this generation where either our parents or grandparents would not have been from the culture that we grew up in, is we're here in this British culture, but we would have grown up where there are some of these values that are taken from, years of, or, decades of being from, the Indian culture being very resourceful and sustainable, which plays a lot into Cano Water. Yeah. And I had Ketan on here recently, and we really dived into how, even though it wasn't intentional, our Indian roots had a lot of sustainability drilled into it. So he would have been raised seeing sustainability around him without realizing that's what it was. Yeah. But when you were talking, it reminded me of this book called A Beautiful Country, where there's this Chinese mother speaking about her moving to the US and then raising an American Chinese daughter. And she was basically making the point that there's the benefits that purple have is that it's a mix of red and blue, but it also suffers from the fact that it is taking elements of red and blue that might not be good because it's diluting it down, right? Of course, so she's kind of saying that, yes, it's nice that her daughter gets the mix of the American and the Chinese culture, but ultimately both are diluted.
I agree.
So she was saying it from a worried way of she's going to lose elements of her Chinese culture. Yeah. But at the same time, where I think the huge benefit is we get to choose to.
And she'll adapt to new from another environment. And I think that it's a really good analogy because I see that in so many different aspects of my life and people around me. It's a really important one for my kids as well.
Exactly.
One thing I will always respect my dad massively for is when my dad got himself out of the council estate and he, built himself up and he did, well for himself. The morals and the values were everything. And I grew up around a lot of people that, that had money, and a lot of these people, were very different to me. There was definitely a bit more of a, an arrogance. Money's everything, everything, and it was kind of, but you didn't make the money. Your parents made the money, whereas for me, it was always about, my dad always said that, he's rich, not because of anything to do with money, but because of that, his family and what he's got. And I really loved that and appreciated that. If I ever acted like that sort of spoilt brat, like I would get called out, massively called out. And, I've really seen that in me within the past sort of 10, 15 years, funny enough, but before Cano Water, like I never really thought about like making loads of money, in all honesty. It was never like on my agenda. I would be happy to kind of just, live a life of a comfortable life.
Yeah, content.
And I think that, going back to that success for me is actually just, if I had nothing, it's just still being me and being happy. And I think something that I see in this generation a lot, well, not even in this generation, I see it a lot, and it really bothers me, is a lot of people, especially in this country, just all they want to talk about is money and football. Not about like, how are you, what's going on. And when you actually dig deep, you actually realize that everyone's going through a lot of shit, but they just don't want to talk about it. And it's kind of clouded by like, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and finding any way not to just talk about reality. And I think that a lot of that comes from roots. A lot of it, if you look at a lot of people's parents, and it comes from that. And I am my dad. We are very different in different ways, but I've always looked at him as being just a very humble, happy person. He's someone that's had a very, very traumatic life. I'm also someone that's gone through a lot of trauma, but I'm very fortunate to have seen my dad go through that and cope. And I've learned that. And, even through business, things go wrong every day. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And my dad is a prime example of someone that just kind of deals with things and is a very resilient individual. And I've been learning a lot about this recently, just about how much my family of origin impacts me. So it's a very, very prevalent and relevant thing. I just think that one of the most important elements of it is that you are yourself, and you're not your parents or their parents. Like, you have to carve out who you are, because you mentioned it before, in a lot of cultures, it's like, you have to be this, you have to be that. A family line of pharmacists, it's like, you need to be that. My story is the opposite. My story is 100% rebellion. And, the one thing I will say about my parents is they never pushed anything on me. they did allow me to kind of be me. But the truth is that even if they didn't, I was born a rebel.
Yeah.
Every single thing that I've ever done has basically been like, fuck everything else. I'm doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
You know, good or bad, that's, you know, there'd be no Cano Water without that, because who would want to put water in a can?
Right.
As well, like, you know, I wouldn't have been a DJ. I would, because that would have been embarrassing. But I've always just done what I want to do because of one word that I didn't have for many years, and I still find myself having it and then not having it, is purpose. I think that is the number one key for me.
Yeah.
Is that if I don't have something to wake up to, aside from my family, and like, because that's a huge purpose for me. But if I don't know what my purpose is, I'll just crumble. I won't. And I think that's an ADHD thing. But I need to be doing what I love doing. Example, you know, at school, maths, science, English, like, I just couldn't concentrate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Art, music, you know, I'm wired in, completely and utterly obsessed.
Yeah.
Because the way that my mind works is I hyper focus on things that I absolutely love doing, and no one can stop me. But if I'm not interested in it, I just can't.
It's fascinating the number of factors at play, and yeah, the common phrase, you know, no one's an overnight success, right? It comes from years, and I think actually it comes from generations of influence. And to what you're saying there, I think the way you've been able to balance the resilience that you've now come to realize has come from somewhere, right? It's because our ancestors have come from somewhere where they've had to knuckle down and get stuff done. But on the flip side, and that's where I can really resonate with what you're saying. Actually, I'll ask you a question and then I'll go into it. So do you think that you come from a family dynamic where people are quite open with their feelings and their emotion?
Very.
Okay.
Very, very open.
Yeah.
That's something that has always been a big thing with my family.
That's good. So because I would say, if I look at my dad and where I thought I resonated with what you were saying, he is also very hardworking. Also someone I would never see him as being a CEO decision maker, but he's an electrician by trade, always been a business owner, and has run his own shop. So he's a manager and a leader in that sense. But could I imagine him walking into like HSBC and being a CEO? No.
Yeah.
Because he's a hands-on tradesperson, and I've always seen him work, 8 till 6 non-stop.
Yeah.
Because he loves it. But I think what we're able to do different to them, not saying it applies in my dad's case because I'm sure he loved it, but we're probably afforded the chance to actually chase purpose.
Agree.
Backed by having come from roots and values built on resilience and actually working hard.
Yeah.
Not, oh my God, I have to do an hour of homework this evening. Like, how hardworking am I? But actually, okay, I'm going to graft because I really want to. And then going by the fact that you've been able to, I guess, hone your ADHD in a way that on top of the purpose now it's working. Whereas, there are cases where obviously ADHD doesn't serve to benefit someone because they haven't found whatever they need to do with it to actually make it serve them.
For sure.
Right.
And listen, even for me with ADHD, like, I still, every day without fail, I find myself struggling and have to kind of find a way to sort of flick that switch on to get me motivated. But, just going back to what you said, I think that, I am fortunate that my dad sort of kind of gave me that mentality of like, go out, work hard, graft. But I think because of my mum's adoption and because of my dad had quite a dysfunctional upbringing, and there wasn't a lot of this sort of entrepreneurialism or sort of you know, those kinds of traits that were sort of pushed onto me or onto my siblings, I feel sometimes like I am creating that for my next generation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You know, I know some people who, you know, their grandparents, you know, went through the Holocaust, and that is definitely a massive part of the person they are today.
Yeah.
It's been passed down really, like really down to them. And you can, it's
so prevalent in there.
Yeah, it's like a light just like shining on, you know, their dad and them. And whereas with me, I kind of feel like it was a blank canvas in a way, which it isn't actually that nice, to be honest with you. I feel like sometimes, I think sometimes I would love a lot more guidance, or would have loved a lot more guidance. And it wasn't that my dad didn't guide me. My dad grew up with no dad. It all comes from this. My dad lost his dad. My mum didn't know who her real family was, even though, like, you know, I'm inseparable with my, you know, my mum's, you know, parents who brought her up. But I felt lost my whole life because my dad and my mum both were lost.
Yeah, didn't have the roots.
It stems from that. My mum's whole world, you know, was, you know, my mum's an addict, alcoholic, you know, who basically her whole life, because of her adoption, was like, because of the abandonment, she never could kind of recover from being adopted. So she always felt like that. And then my dad, obviously, you know, like, he never had a leader, really. He was always sort of looking after his, you know, his family, because they never had a dad. So he was kind of like, he was the leader in it within his tribe, I guess.
Yeah.
It's funny because most podcasts I do, it's quite cookie cutter, I know, but I'm sitting here thinking a lot about, and things keep popping up in my head, you know, just about where, you know, why I am the way I am.
Yeah.
And it's funny, like, so many different things have shaped me. But the most important thing, I think, is I can really say that I am the person that I am, and that I want myself to be, albeit I'm not perfect, because I've had to.
Yeah.
You know, my family, there's a lot of there's not so much motivation, you know, and that is, you know, and in some families, you've got the mum and the dad that are like, you know, that have worked for big companies, and they're like pushing it on their kids, and their kids have got all A stars, and like the kids are competing against the other siblings, and it's like, I never had any of that ever. You know, I've actually just had a world full of like traumatic experiences where nothing really has gone right for me and my family. In all honesty, there's always something terrible going on.
Yeah.
So when you say about the openness, like, that's a positive.
Yeah.
But I've had to really carve out me, you know, like, I would say that I am a version that is like no other in my family that I know. And that's important to me, because someone, actually a therapist, once said to me, you know, because I didn't want my kids to have the childhood that I had. And that was my biggest fear, that I would unintentionally do it, because you do it without knowing, like you said before, because it's all you know. And he said to me, if you work on yourself, what started with you will end with you.
Okay.
And I've kind of had to really work very, very hard on myself to be the best version of me now, you know, whether it be going to rehab and, you know, being sober, and I'm on ADHD medication at the moment. You know, I'm very open about these things, because I think it's really important for people to understand that it's okay to be that and accept that, because, you know, and if I'm to be the person that is to put all my, you know, shit out there just to help someone, then so be it. I'm happy to be that person and be open about it, because, you know, I spend a lot of my time helping others, just like others have helped me. But it is a really important thing for me to become this version of myself that can be the best version for my wife and my kids. Because essentially, you know, if I don't do that, I would massively worry. Because, you know, as I said, like, there's a lot of severe, dark, deep mental health problems within my immediate family, all of us.
Right.
So it's massively important to deal with it.
One thing that I remember learning about, when I find it fascinating, like kind of what are the, again, roots of ADHD and even things like addiction, and realizing how much of it is actually genetics.
Yeah.
An understanding of, depending on how you argue the science, whether it's like too much dopamine or lack of dopamine, but I guess it's also how the brain is wired to
100%.
process that dopamine. And again, you'll know more. But what I think was really a standout when understanding this is, again, coming from, so I've also lived in China. And so comparing that to coming from the Indian culture and experiencing the Chinese culture, obviously there's lots of differences, but some of the similarities are because the sense of self and identity is built on your family and your community. Whereas, you know, the US is a prime example of where it's very much me and I and my self-accomplishments. Indian and Chinese culture and Japanese culture are very much the other side of it. Like, I think in Hindi, there's not even a word for I. Everything is referred to as like us and we.
Yeah.
Which is nice because the support that you're getting and the sense of not feeling alone and having a tribe. But it also means that, kind of like you touched on earlier, you're always trying to fulfill a certain expectation or definition that is placed on you, because you letting yourself down in school is letting your family down.
Of course.
And you can see how that can work against you. And I think that's where, you know, something like what you're saying is, it is needed to stand out, because even like you've quoted many times that when you first came out with Cano Water, 99% of people thought you were stupid, right? Yeah. If you come from a culture and society where 99% of people don't back you, you're not going to do it.
Yeah.
You know, the unlearning what's been passed down. Do you think that's something that other people listening in who might be thinking the same thing, like, oh, I really resonate with Josh, like I feel like I'm so different to the rest of my family, what does it take them to be able to be like, I'm going to take what's great from, you know, there's resilience and the ability to take risks, but I'm going to unlearn the fact that I've just always tried to fit this mold and I don't feel comfortable actually giving my 100% self, because if that fails, I've let down a whole community. How does someone unlearn that?
So my view is probably different to a lot of other people's view. My view has always been, fuck what other people think. But I mean that in a humble way and not in a selfish way. Yeah. So I mean that in a way of, and I, you know, also being Jewish as well. Like I've seen that in the community, exactly the same as what you were saying. And, you know, I'm not a religious person. I've always actually rebelled from religion. You know, I've just always, you know, I believe in the community aspect of it, but I've always actually, I've always kind of seen religion as hate. I've always thought that. I'm actually more spiritual and kind of believe that, you know, everyone is the same and we should all just, you know, accept and love each other, but that's just not reality. Right. The truth is, and there's a, you know, it's not, is it a saying? I don't know. You know, I once did a podcast years ago called Positively Selfish. I don't think people should be selfish because, and I think that there is a limit to the I, me. But I do think that it is important that you put yourself first. And I'll tell you why, because I don't think that people will be happy, genuinely happy, if they don't. And I've seen it over the years, you know, I've seen, you know, people who are too afraid to be honest about their sexuality,
Right.
too afraid to tell people about their addiction, too afraid to kind of, just be honest because of what family and other people think. And, I would prefer I'd prefer for my kid or my siblings, and I've been in this a few times, to be honest with me than to hear that they've taken their own life because they're not happy. And I've seen that, I've lost friends to suicide. I've been around people that were so ashamed to just tell people who and what they are, but that's me. This is me. The sad truth is that, and I've always got to look at like expectation versus reality. I'm very fortunate that my parents didn't judge me. Whereas there's plenty of families where, that's it, you're out. So, the answer is you've got to make that decision of like, do I die on the hill kind of thing, because with certain families, it's like, if you don't do this, that's it in a lot of cultures.
Yeah.
And I just think that if you believe that is what's right, then that's what you should do. Even if I don't agree with it, it's not for me to agree and disagree. And I think that's something that I've always been. I'm politically homeless. Like, I am not someone that is on that side or that side. I'm very much in the middle. I hear both arguments. And funny enough, even if I agree or I disagree, a lot of the time I won't have that conversation in public because that's just my opinion.
Right.
And I just think that we live in a world where, I believe in free speech, but there's a lot of hate speech as well, and a lot of like, I've actually talking about roots. Like, I've never ever felt like in my lifetime, I've never felt like we are, as a planet, I think that we are more disconnected than any period of time.
Yeah.
Because of social media. And I think there's benefits and there's negatives, but I think that we are living in a time where we are so connected through social media, but just so disconnected.
Yeah, people don't know who they are.
And people don't know who they are. That's one thing that I'm very, very proud of. Like, for myself, is that, since coming out of, well, actually, since I was 12 years old, but since like really coming out of rehab at 15 years old and becoming sober and really, I've basically spent 19 years on like working on myself, learning about myself, learning about through business as well. Like, the positives, my weaknesses. I've got a lot of weaknesses. And I think that one thing that I've really, really realized by speaking to a lot of people, and I've only realized this through being the person I am today, I'm working on myself, is that, as you said, like, people are very lost. People are trying to be something that they're not, to fit in somewhere. And it's really sad because there's all these people running around trying to be someone that they're not. And a lot of people are just not happy. And they're trying to get this quick fix to make them happy, which is actually taking them away from the problem. Listen, I'm an addict, okay? I had a severe alcohol problem, and I'm still an addict. I still get cravings, maybe not on drinking drugs, but in other areas. The problem wasn't the drink or the drugs. The problem was that I've definitely got an addiction problem, but the problem is it's a mind problem.
Yeah.
I'm not happy. You know, I'm trying to fill a void, and drink and drugs were the thing to use. It could be clothes.
Yeah.
It could be, you know, for me, it's like the gym, family, DJing, Cano Water, more positive things. But, you know, we're all looking for things to fix us because we're not happy and our lives are at 1,000 miles per hour. And I believe that a lot of that comes from just not being happy, not knowing who we truly are. I would argue that, you know, our ancestors, they knew who they were.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? They went through the pain and suffering.
And they also had, their reference point was the community and tribe around them, and not
we're all together.
This username on TikTok.
100%.
Right.
100%. And I agree with that. And I think that, you know, that's where, yeah, I think about that a lot recently, mainly because obviously I'm starting my family. And it's really funny how life works, because you go through like different periods in life. It's like 10-year periods. And I'm going through this, you know, new phase of mine now, going into like family period, you know, getting married, having a kid, about to have another one on the way. And it's weird. It's weird because you're constantly, you're not just thinking about you anymore. You're thinking about others, but you're also thinking about the future.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's scary, especially in this time when we are in very, very uncertain times. And that is, and listen, I'm sure that's, you know, no different to, you know, our ancestors thinking about the future. But I think that we are living in a time where it is, it's very, very, very different.
This is actually taking me slightly off track, but it's really interesting what you're saying about our ancestors knowing who they were and what they stood for. And I, as part of what I am creating here with Roots to Roots, and there's an offshoot brand called Lifetimes, and I've got a, you know, quick fire series questions for you at the end. But one of the ones that I love to ask is if people could give just one piece of advice for that their own kid would open up. You've written something on it, and you would hope they live by that one thing, what it would be. So I'll ask you that at the end, so you've got a little teaser into it.
Cool.
But there was one lady I spoke to, and she didn't actually want to share her answer, but she said she was going to do it with her son, and her son is 3 years old, and she was telling me that every night before bed, instead of reading a children's book like Gruffalo or whatever, I know that because of my nephew, he would actually ask her about, oh, Mom, like, where did you grow up? And she's a Hungarian, and she lived in a village.
Love that.
And I thought she didn't seem happy when she was telling me that story. So I was just like, oh, okay, that's it's really nice that he's interested in that at that age. And she said yes, but after a while, I had all these stories to tell him. Like, we grew up in a village. We used to go down, like, run down the street and get the milk, and you know, steal things from the neighbor's garden, you know, innocent things. And she goes, then I started wondering, when my son grows up and has his kids and they ask him the same questions, what is he going to say?
Yeah.
Because right now he's only 3, but the next step is get an iPad.
Yeah. You know what the truth is? He's going to tell her story. And that there is the sad thing if you don't become your own person.
Yeah. You
end up basically telling other people's stories, because your story is, I guess we're all in a place of privilege in a way, but I'm not just talking about money. You know, like, I think that there's many different battles that we go through. Mental is one that I'm enormously passionate about. I like to talk more about mental than I actually like to talk about materialistic stuff, because I think materialistic stuff is just it's just a plaster, you know, over a lot of wounds a lot of the time, and actually, like, every time I've ever got something materialistic, it hasn't actually made me happier. It's made me proud. But I think that, you know, the mental stuff is really, really key for me. And I think that just going back to that, like, her story is about her life.
Yeah.
His story, depending on whatever he chooses to do, is based on his life. But what's nice is that, well, you would hope that her story has inspired him to not steal, but work for something.
Create his own legacy.
Or, you know, go and do something that, create his own legacy, or lead, like, you know, sort of bring her legacy into his own life. You know, I see a lot of people starting businesses, you know, my parents were this and now I'm doing this. And I love it. You know, it's really, really lovely. As long as you can bring your own story into it. And I think that's really key, because it's your roots, and we all live in, let's just say we all live in 100-year blocks. You know, in 100 years time, or in 1,000 years time, what do you want to be? You know, do you want to be remembered?
Yeah, exactly.
And we're living in a society now where a lot of people just, do you know what? I was about to say something I actually disagree with, because I think that people are trying to do great stuff, but we do live in a society where we are all very privileged. We are all very privileged in compared to, you know, 100 years ago.
Yeah.
But everyone has, and I think this is the, you know, like, you know, there's that whole thing about Molly May, like, everyone's got the same 24 hours.
Yeah.
And it went, like, where I really disagree with that is everyone does have the same 24 hours, but not everyone has the same mind.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I've got people with bipolar in my family, and people that have got severe mental health problems. And also, as someone personally with ADHD, my 24 hours feels like a week.
Right.
Like, every day feels like a week. And every minute is tough. It's constantly like overthinking, or, you know, not thinking, brain fog, you know, cravings. Like, there's for someone like me with ADHD, even on the medication, like, which definitely helps clear the fog a little bit, but it's like I don't have a solid path, if that makes sense. Now, when I get purpose, I get excited, and that actually does give me a bit more of a path. And when I'm concentrating on something that I'm enjoying, but I think that is, you know, that is a big thing, is that, and that goes back to the roots of, like, try and carve out who you are and not be someone else, because you might have a different mind. Remember, you are your mum and your dad. You're not just your mum, and you're not just your dad. That's what I've realized. You've got traits from both, and you kind of have to work out what ones are good and what ones are bad. I think that's a reason why a lot of relationships don't work, to be honest with you. I think that a lot of people, they might just be like a lot of people, they go into a relationship with someone else that's come from another family.
Yeah.
Who might have similar roots but different personalities, and they clash.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of, like, being in a relationship, like, I've learned in anything, it's got to be a partnership.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of relationships go wrong. There's a lot of expectations. There's a lot of, a lot of learnt behaviour from family that has been brought down, and actually, like, you're not you. You're you know, and that's where this conversation is very important to me. Is, like, from my own life, because I, even currently, as I mentioned before, I've got, a family member that's going through something bad. And, they are a very close family member who I haven't spoken to in a while. And they are, they're someone that has traits that I don't want. And I've had to work on myself recently to really understand why I act like that. And a lot of it is from, that person. And I think you might have mentioned before, like, you've got to learn new behavior. That's really not easy when you've been around that your whole life. And it's also, I tell you what, it's also not easy when you think that you're not like that person.
Yeah.
And you have to accept that you are. And that's another thing as well, like accepting that actually you are a bit like that person. And then you have to learn how to change. And I just think that going out of your comfort zone is just one of the most important things to do in life.
I think that's exactly the nail on the head. What you said there, in the same way that you said that this episode doesn't feel like a cookie cutter and it's got you thinking, even in your responses, having done over 100 of these, you've got me thinking about how different conversations and things that I've read where they're specifically talking about one thing just apply so much to this situation. So one of my favorite books is called The Culture Map. And it talks about the cultural differences of people's behaviors. It fundamentally says that, yes, okay, you can't stereotype a person just by the culture they come from, but you can definitely notice patterns and traits in their behavior because of the cultural programming that they've had, right? But it is on a spectrum. And so one of my biggest learnings from that was, I grew up in the UK. I've come from an African Indian background household, but then when I lived in China, I only when I went there did I see patterns in their behavior, which I found unusual. Everything from what they ate for breakfast to how they spoke to each other in meetings and what you speak about around the dinner table, right? We would sit opposite a dinner table in China and I could tell you that you've put on weight and ask you how much money you make.
Yeah.
You wouldn't do that here. It's the
100%.
opposite here.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't really ask you about, how's your relationship going? Whereas here you would. So you just notice those differences where in the beginning I thought, that's odd. But then I realized, there's actually 1.2 billion of them. So if anything, I'm odd. And it's only when you get outside of your comfort zone. So in the same way in a relationship that you've been programmed, and it doesn't just have to apply to your, life partner. It can be your business relationship. It can be your PT, whatever.
Of course.
When you've been programmed in a certain way, whether it's, tough love is normalized. So when tough love is normalized, you're like, this is how I'm going to get through to my partner. This is how I'm going to get through to my kid. I'll show tough love because that's how I learned growing up.
Yeah.
And I've got a good story of when I used to be at nursery, my dad would have to pick me up in the middle of his working day, and I would still be playing in the swings or whatever was there, and he'd always have to wait for me. And I'm a little kid, so I don't know any better. And then one day he came to pick me up, but he sat in the car around the corner where he could see me, and obviously all the other kids got picked up. And for 45 minutes, after I was waiting outside, then he came to get me. And obviously I'm crying and he's pretending that he was late. And then the teacher said, no problem. As soon as he got in the car, he said, how does that feel?
Yeah.
And I'm what do you mean? I'm bawling my eyes out. And he said, every week you make me wait for you.
Yeah.
And obviously I still remember that to today because yes, it was a tough love route, but it worked. And I knew it came from a place of love, but it doesn't mean it's going to work in every relationship.
No.
And only when you, in my example of stepping out into the China environment, not saying everyone has to go and live abroad and across the world to do it, but without understanding that there are other values, traits, and inherited learnings, like you said, in your partner and the culture they've come from, you're either always going to think you're right, and then you're going to lose a lot of relationships that way, or you're just never going to have a proper relationship with that person.
I think what I've been very fortunate with in my life is I grew up in a bubble. Everyone is very similar. They all sound similar, look similar. It's like many cultures, but it is a bubble. Because I was a rebel, I obviously went into different cultures. So like DJing, as an example, I met different people. Okay, you know, not a lot of people in my in my culture are DJs, or, you know, they are nowish, but when I first started DJing, when I was sort of like 11, 12, but what was massive for me was going into recovery, so into rehab, because I was around people from all different wakes of life. You know, I've got a saying, strangers saved my life, because, you know, I walked into rehab, it's kind of like Narnia, you know, like you've walked into this like world that you just don't even think exists, into meeting people that are so different to you from all different walks of life. And then, you know, people that, you know, that you wouldn't look at on the streets. You'd be nervous to look at them,
right.
You know, or that, or you might look at them and think that they are fine, and actually they're not, you know. And I think that when I came out of there and I went into AA, started going to AA meetings, and I've been going to meetings now for the past 19 years, and sitting in church halls on, you know, evenings or, you know, mornings, and saying, "Hi, I'm Josh, I'm an addict," and, you know, people wanting to help me, and sort of, you know, you walk into a meeting, people would hug you, they would take your number, they'd reach out to you. What I've been very fortunate with is meeting these people. Like, I never really had a functional upbringing, but I learned a lot from my girlfriends' mums or girlfriends' families. Quite funny. Like, how you pick up traits. But something that I am very fortunate about, as I said, like, is meeting all of these different people outside of my bubble.
Yeah.
I think that's really, really important, because, you know, you see these, like, you know, you see these stories of like people that have come out of really like toxic religious worlds into sort of like, you know, they're like, oh my God, you know, I was in a cult, you know, and I had no idea that I was, you know. I think that I wasn't in a cult, but, you know, I think it's really important to, as you said, to travel, learn different cultures, understand that, you know, there is a world outside of your bubble.
Yeah.
And that isn't to say to leave your bubble, but like, be open-minded, you know, be the trendsetter, bring new things into your bubble, you know, show. And I've always felt like that. I've always wanted to be that person. I've always wanted to be the person that kind of like, I've always wanted to inspire people to do things that are different. And it's nice, actually, because, you know, when I started DJing, you know, now I get people, young kids, the whole time saying to me like, oh, you know, like, I really want to be a DJ. You can teach me how to DJ. Over the years, I've probably had like sort of 5, 10 kids like that I've sort of trained, and now they're all like, you know, really good DJs, and they're kind of like just sort of stood with me and watched me DJ, and I've taught them and given them an opportunity. Similar to business, you know, I've had people say to me, you know, I really want. I was in finance and I fucking hated it, but, you know, I saw what you did, and not many people do this within the community, and like, it's really inspired me. And, you know, and the biggest one for me is like the ADHD and addiction. Like, I get messages all the time, like, I don't know who to speak to, I don't know who to reach out to. You know, I spend most of my life helping those people, because, you know, they might not feel like they have got that support around them. They might have financial support, great. You know, your dad's got loads of money, or, you know, your family come from money. That doesn't mean that you're, you know, doesn't mean that you're in your happy place.
Yeah.
Every day, I think the purpose of life is to learn. I really do. I think you need to learn how to be the best version of you, because we're all going in different directions. And actually, if you think about our ancestors, a lot of them probably went in a very straight path.
Yeah.
We are in a place at the moment where, and it's good, and there are pros and its cons, where like there is no set path. in some ways, maybe, but that can actually be very scary. I feel like that every day. Like I'm going down an unconventional, risky path that could change at any minute. The thing for me is that all of the work that I've done around trauma and, you know, worrying about the future and all of that is to prepare me for when, you know, if shit does hit the fan, to be the best version of me. Because, you know, I'll give you one example. My younger brother, when he was 12, he got diagnosed with cancer. Okay. So it was a horrible time. He was in hospital for a year. I watched my dad deal with that. No one knew that was going to happen. Just came out of nowhere. And, you know, another member of my family went a completely different route and couldn't handle it. But my dad, he handled it. You know, the only way that he handled it is because he had that traumatic resilience when he was younger to go through it. And also, like, his brain is wired differently to a lot of people. He just can deal with things. I think that being able to get through life, especially like now, and navigating it when there's hurdles along the way, and accepting, and this is my point, acceptance is key here. Accepting that shit happens, and when it happens, going through it, knowing that however you deal with it is going to make you stronger. And also, you're going to set the trend for everyone around you. Yeah. And that for me is so important. That's where, like, the morals, as I said to you, the morals, it's that is so important. Money comes and goes at the end of the day. But morals and how you are sort of respected as an individual and how you're remembered is very important. And every day we need to work on ourselves to, otherwise what is the actual point of life? Yeah. I'm telling you now, the point of life is not going and playing paddle with your life. It just isn't. It can't be, because that would be offensive to our ancestors, right. I believe. Yeah. You know. Yeah. I do believe that. And you know that you know, when we talk about Cano Water, like, that is why we started Cano Water. Like, this whole conversation that we've had now is led to that, because that's why we why we started Cano, because we didn't come from a background of sustainability. I was part of the problem. I was the guy that probably flipped my cigarette and threw my McDonald's out the window at like 12 to 14. It wasn't until, you know, we were very lost people, and I think this is a really important thing. This is why we're seeing a lot of, like, the class clown, naughty, lost kids doing well in life, is because of they're finding their purpose. And the world right now it's not geared for the person that's just gone to university and that's coming out with a degree. It's geared for the different thinkers. People are looking for creative thinkers. Next week, I'm doing a talk at a very large organization, a big company of around 1,000 people, just talking about neurodiversity. Yeah, nice. And how, you know, I think, you know, one about how to kind of show the people that don't have neurodiversity, like, what it's like maybe to be neurodivergent. And then, you know, for the organization really to see as well, like, that these people are very, very creative, different thinkers. And for Cano Water, like, we you know, this whole conversation, we broke the barriers. We did something that no one had ever done before. We didn't listen to people calling us stupid, because, like, who the fuck are they to tell us that it's stupid? Yeah. my thing with Cano, we never started it to make loads of money. We started it because we believed in it and we wanted to create something really cool.
And I remember you a really nice quote of yours that I found where you said that we wanted an idea insane enough to grab attention, but smart enough to drive home a serious message.
Yeah.
And I think, depending on how you dissect that, but it just sums up everything that you have been saying about what you stand for, because it's an idea insane enough because I've always been a rebel.
Yeah.
And I want to fulfill that. Like, that's still part of me, you know, that fire. What gets me up in the morning is doing something driven by I'm making a difference and I'm rebelling at the same time. But then, very importantly, it's to grab attention so that you've created something that is actually making a difference to someone. And then smart enough for the serious message. And that's where the purpose comes in.
Exactly. And I think, you know, and the most important thing is that not only does it keep me going, because one trait with ADHD is like starting something and just stopping it straight away. And I've been, done that many times. But I want my kids to look up to me as someone that's made a big difference. Like, even if Cano isn't here, you know, the amount of plastic bottles that we've removed, and you know, the category that is the canned water category globally now because of us, and just basically doing something that is out of our comfort zones, which is really fucking hard. You know, coming out of your comfort zone, and I think that's where, you know, I want my kids to. This is going to sound weird, but I don't mind my kids seeing me fail. All I care about is that they see me getting back up.
Yeah.
You know, that's the thing. You know, after 3 years, after I came out of rehab, I relapsed. And I was 3 years clean and I relapsed. And, you know, I sat there for so long just being like, I can't you know, I've been telling everyone I'm clean. And like, you know what? When I got over the fact that I was doing everything, it was like for everyone else.
Yeah.
And not for me.
Yeah.
And as soon as I started thinking to myself, oh yeah, but what if everyone is like, no, you, you know, and I think that you need to have every single person. I heard something amazing recently about laziness. Laziness is putting the effort before the reward. If you put the reward first and you think about the reward, how you think about the effort, you essentially will get up earlier in the morning.
I thought you were going to say the other one, which is laziness is basically sticking your middle finger up at your future self.
Yeah, all that. And I think there is it's the exact same thing. I mean, one really is kind of like the action, and the other one is like it's kind of the other one really is kind of like in 10 years time looking back and being like, fuck, yeah, I could have.
Yeah.
But as I said to you before, everyone is different. And I think that's something I always have to come back to is we can't change anyone else but ourselves. And expectations is a massive thing. The amount of times that I've tried to change my wife or I've tried to change an outcome of something, family members, I can't change. They have to change themselves. So I think that it's really funny talking about roots because it all, their thing comes from their roots. My things come from my roots. But as I said to you before, you know, what started with me will end with me.
Yeah.
For me, my childhood was bad enough for me that I want to put that I've put the fence up, and I'm starting, you know, a new. I'm redefining culture for my family. But my wife, she comes from her own, you know, so like it's kind of like, you know, I can't put up her fence.
Yeah, they're moving parts, but we are, and I think that's a really nice, strong message to end on, which is that your roots will have played a role in your life, whether you've consciously visited it or not. But you know, like you've said over this conversation, you have started looking into it recently and seen how much it shaped. But it doesn't mean that you have to carry on those same patterns unless, well, you get to choose, right? you're like, well, some of these patterns are good.
Yeah.
For me, it's for sure resilience, adaptability, being able to, again, my parents coming from being Indians in Africa and then going to the UK, they were already minorities when they were born.
Yeah.
So becoming a minority again, they just learned that if we don't fit into society, we're going to be excluded. And now, obviously, for me growing up, it wasn't even a thing where I thought, oh, okay, let me magnetize myself towards the other people like me. Like my friend group, my professional group, everyone's so diverse, and it's never been even a second thought for me. But that's because I'm like, well, they made it look so easy.
Of course, yeah.
But I love what you were saying earlier about the getting outside of your box and like thinking about how other people think. Because, and again, you'll know this probably better than me, but what is it? I think, organizations where at the top they're truly diverse, and I don't mean diverse by skin color or even gender, but diversity really comes in thought. When you actually come from different roots, different upbringings, someone might have be neurodiverse and someone neurodivergent and someone might not. They're like 3 or 4 times more productive and have a 3 times more productive and 4 times higher bottom line. Something like that is the numbers, because you actually have a diversity of thought in the room, which our ancestors, you could argue that our ancestors didn't have that because they grew up in a tribe, but they didn't need to.
Yeah.
Because we live in a global world now where I'm on Microsoft Teams speaking to someone in Spain or Japan.
Yeah.
You're selling your product all around the world. Whereas your ancestors weren't selling their products to someone in New Zealand, maybe.
Yeah.
So you need a diversity of thought because you're trying to reach people from different backgrounds, genders, beliefs, geographies.
Yeah.
And if you just have a room full of people who might look physically different, but you all come from a middle-class background from North London, you're not going to have an understanding of how the rest of the world works. Yeah. And so I think that's where, exactly like you were saying, that when you step outside of your comfort zone and actually understand where different people have come from and then bring them into your organization, because you have strengths, but you have flaws.
Of course.
I'm sure half the people that you've hired are people who are fitting in
100%
in those gaps. That's what ultimately good relationships and success comes down to. So
definitely.
Thank you for that. I mean, we barely talked about Cano Water.
I know.
And that's why I think we could do a whole other part 2, which would be great.
Yeah, I mean, listen, people know that story.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll put links to, or you send me links to the ones that really go through that journey well. But yeah, again, for people who already know you, I thought this would be a great chance to dive into some of the things that I've briefly spoken to you about over the past few months. But yeah, this is a great chance to really get into the weeds of it. So thank you.
All good.
I'll finish on what I call the Lifetime's Fast 5. I call them fast, but you can take as long as you want with them.
Cool.
But normally they're quick fire. The difference with these questions is they're all about uncovering, even though we've done quite a lot of it, uncovering more about who we are, where we've come from, and starting to shape the type of person and values that we want to leave behind. So the questions are very much based around our roots and also the legacy we want to put together. So if you're ready, I'll start with question 1.
I'll try my best.
If someone in your family 2 generations from now were to have the chance to listen to this, what's the one thing that you'd want them to understand about you?
That I made change, that I went out of my comfort zone and didn't just sort of go with the norm. That life wasn't easy, but there was a lot of belief and kind of and learning. But do you know, one of the main things is that I put the work in all aspects of life, not just sort of mentally and physically. I think that is something that is very, very important, and that life just isn't easy. You've got to make your own. Got to make your own journey, really.
Yeah. I want to expand on it because they're fast 5. I'm not meant to interfere. What is a specific lesson that's been passed down to you that has really shaped who you are?
I guess I've kind of said it. Like, just be yourself, really. I think that's something that's quite prevalent is like kind of just be you and hustle, really. I mean, if I think about like the main reason I am who I am today is like is because of my dad. It's like, you know, work hard and be a good person. That's what I would say.
Yeah. Question number 3. If you could sit down with someone from your family's past, have one conversation with them, who would that be, and what's the one question you'd ask them?
That's a really good one. Do you know what? It's there's a few people, but I think that the main one would be my mum's mum, because we don't know why she gave her away. And I think that my childhood my life has been so shaped by that.
Yeah.
Because it really affected my mum and has always affected my mum, that I think that if we could get that answer, maybe things could have been different. And the other one would be my cousin who died, because she, like, I never knew her, but I would never be sober if it wasn't for her.
Wow.
Because her sister was a heroin addict who survived, and she kind of, without that death in the family, I don't think that they would have acted quick enough and known what to do. So I've always sort of, you know, I've never thought about my mum's mum one. I've never really been asked that question. But between those two, definitely, yeah. Because I think that those are two things that have shaped my life.
Yeah.
And I don't know what question I would ask my cousin. But yeah, it's still worth a conversation.
No, thank you for sharing that. And this would be an interesting one. So question 4, if your younger self could see you now, what would surprise them the most?
That they're alive,
Yeah.
probably. And I think that, you know, one thing that you said before about the woman that speaks to her, you know, the kid asks at bedtime, you know, something that I would do is I would make my kids write a gratitude list.
Okay.
Because that's something that I've done for many years. And a fears list as well, because there's a lot of, you know, everyone's got fears. I think one of the most important things is, like, looking back at that kid, there was nothing really, he couldn't see anything that he was grateful for. Whereas now, you know, I've got everything that I never in a million years thought I could get.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, it's that believe in yourself.
Yeah.
And do you know, that's the thing. Do you be proud that you've also done you, that you've, you know, I haven't sort of conformed to what everyone else has done. I've taken my own path, and, you know, it seems to have, you know, paid off. It's never going to be easy. And I think that's something that's, you know, important as well, because at that age, younger self, I thought the life was going to get easier, and it's never got easier.
I mean, if it was easy, more people would be doing it, right?
Exactly.
Finally, it's if you could record or write one message that your future loved ones would read, listen, and you would hope that they live by this one thing, what would that say?
So funny enough, it's written on our cans, and I always use this as an example, but there's a big meaning to it. Don't bottle it.
Yeah.
I come from a world in my immediate family where it's coming out of your comfort zone is very difficult. Very, very, very difficult. And that don't bottle it message is very much about us 3 founders who didn't bottle it. We were told we couldn't do something. We did it. And the thing about coming out of your comfort zone is that when you've done it, you get this new sense of belief.
Yeah.
And then there's another challenge. And then I think that don't bottle it message will live through me forever, because we didn't bottle it. And I would, you know, I'll be very much pushing that message onto my kids of be you, be the best version of you, be happy, and just go and do something that has purpose and meaning, because that will give you purpose and meaning for the rest of your life. I think that's I actually think that's the key to staying young as well. I do. You know, I see people that, you know, I'm very fortunate I haven't gone grey yet. 34, I still haven't yet, thank God. It's definitely coming. But I really, really put a lot of my kind of like health is wealth at the end of the day. And, you know, I've really like tried to look after myself, but I'm doing everything that I want to do.
Yeah.
And I think that is a really, really important message for, you know, for anyone, to be honest with you, is the day that you can finally be you is like, is the day that you can kind of relax.
Yeah.
I genuinely mean that. And as I said, it's going to be fucking hard. And you're going to have to go through stuff where people disagree and blah, 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 but you're you at the end of the day.
Yeah, you let go of that anxiety of waking up every day and basically not being you.
Trying to be someone else.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So that was a Lifetime's Fast Five. What I love about these questions, and exactly as you did, it really starts to reveal the things that last. So the meaningful parts of you, what you stand for and want to be remembered for, that aren't just applicable today, but will last generations. And so I really appreciate what you shared. But even for those of you, whether you're watching or listening at home, I'd love for you to give them a go and see what you uncover. If you click the link in the description, there's also an access to the full list of Lifetime's questions, of which I choose 5 from. If any of them really, really appeal to you, that you found you or managed to uncover something really interesting about yourselves, do leave it in the description and I will read every single response. Thank you so much, Josh. Even just people who want to get to know you a bit on a deeper level.
For sure.
I think that was I hope that was a really good insight into you. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
I definitely want to do a part 2 and actually
Let's
find
do
out
it.
when you hit the 100 million mark.
Yeah.
Let's sit down for that.
We'll see. Yeah.
Again, thanks again.
Thanks, mate.